I want to welcome everyone today for our second presentation in our Urban Agriculture Pest Management webinar series. This webinar series is coordinated by the Great Lakes Urban Agriculture IPM Working Group. This work is supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture Crop Protection and Pest Management Program through the North Central IPM Center, and we thank them for their support. Oops, let me let a few more people in here. Okay, just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. The presentation today is being recorded and will be sent out by the end of day Friday. I apologize about last week. The long weekend kind of threw me for a loop, so I will make sure to send this one out by Friday. And we'll follow that same pattern until the end of the presentations. At that time, I'll send all of the recording links out in one email to summarize our entire series. Please note that these presentation recordings are only going to be available for 60 days past the recording date. Okay, but that should give us plenty of time to view those. And just to provide a quick orientation to our settings today in this Zoom meeting or webinar, we're going to try to maintain that webinar quality. So I've adjusted the settings so everyone is muted and you will not be able to unmute yourself. I've also asked everyone to keep their videos off. And if your video does come on, I will force stop it so that we're really focusing on the speaker today and their presentation. So if you do need anything, if you have a technical difficulty or you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box. You can put questions as we go in the chat box, and I will be monitoring that. We will hold our questions till the end, though. So unless it's a quick clarification that's important, I will hold that till the end, where we can have some question and answer with Jacqueline here. All right, with that, let's get started. So Jacqueline Kowalski is our speaker today. She is an associate extension educator with the University of Connecticut, specializing in urban agriculture, where she provides technical support to urban farmers and agriculturally related social enterprises. Jacqueline has a wealth of experience in the field, including several years with The Ohio State University, specializing in urban agriculture here in Northeast Ohio. And she has also served as the Director of Horticulture and Agronomy for the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Agriculture. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacqueline, and we welcome you. Thanks for presenting on this today.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a second to pull this up. And let me get this into presentation view. Again, as Maggie had mentioned, I used to work for Ohio State University Extension in Summit in Connecticut County, so I'm glad to have the opportunity to give a presentation back in my home region. Prior to working with the government of the Virgin Islands, the territorial government of the Virgin Islands, and this was many, many years ago, I started my career right after finishing Michigan State University at the University of the Virgin Islands as a research analyst for the vegetable crops program, which is where I had my first experience of what we sometimes call ethnic crops, or what we call, in this case, I changed it for this presentation to world crops, or there have been different terminologies used over the periods of time. And it's interesting the way that some of these crops are gaining footholds in different parts of the United States and different parts of the world. But before we get started, I want to provide a land acknowledgement for, the University of Connecticut, and I'm trying to move my speaker grid, but we'd like to now begin by acknowledging that the land at which my office is located is the territory of Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill, the Gusset, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land, and we aspire to uphold our responsibility according to their example. And so, as I talked about in my introduction, the term ethnic crop is relative because everything is relative when it comes to food crops. I love this diagram that was printed by CIAT, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. And if you ever want to download it for use for your own programs or for programs with youth, it is a really great representation of the center of origins of different food crops in the world. But if you take a look at North America, you'll notice that when we talk about the center of origin, very few crops actually have their center of origin in North America. And even if we look at a crop like pumpkins, we notice that in Central America, is also a center of diversity. Tropical South America, also a center of diversity for those crops. There's nothing, or very few things that we can really say that we're here in North America without the movement of peoples around the world. Blueberries, strawberries, some grape species, sunflowers, cranberries are really all. And so everything that we can, I shouldn't say everything, but most things that we consume were what we'd once call an ethnic crop. Also, some crops in some parts of the United States that we call ethnic crops or world crops are actually grown quite widely in the United States in different parts of the United States. So for example, while we don't grow a lot of peanuts in Michigan, parts of the South grow a whole heck of a lot of peanuts. Although we don't grow a lot of okra here in Connecticut, many parts of the South grow a lot of okra. So some of these crops that we are now looking at in different ways, we can already find here. But why are we looking at these different crops? Sometimes they're also called emerging crops because our communities continue to diversify. There are people coming from different parts of the world all the time, different folks who are building communities. For example, I used to work in Cleveland, an Akron area, and there are a number of refugee resettlement agencies that assist people who are coming from different parts of the world resettle. And we want culturally appropriate foods for individuals who are coming from different parts of the world to be able to find those foods in a fresh form in their own communities and in their new communities. The culinary industry is also always looking for new ideas. And even if you are a backyard gardener, you want to try new things in your garden. And there are a lot of new things that we're finding in seed catalogs and that we're finding in demonstration gardens. We do know that we had about 1 million persons who migrated to the United States in 2020. You'll see these migration patterns over the course of the past 10 years. You notice that huge dip in 2021, which coincided with the pandemic. And then as the pandemic somewhat eased up, those numbers increased once again. So where are folks coming from? So the center of origin for foreign-born persons in the United States. I'm sorry, I keep getting this bar across my screen that's covering my presentation. Living in the United States. 25% of the persons who are foreign-born persons who are living in the US are from Mexico. About 12% from China, 6% from India, 6% from the Philippines. However, if you take Asia as a whole, all the countries in Asia, that percentage is about 28%. If you group Africa, if you group the Caribbean, you'll see that we have folks that are coming here all the time. The countries of origins for refugee population changes over time. At the Refugee Resettlement Act, I think it was 1980, there's been approximately 3 million refugees resettled in the United States. And where those individuals are coming from has changed, again, due to atrocities that are happening in the world at different points in time. In 2019, the majority of refugees were coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Myanmar. Now, our largest refugee groups are coming from Afghanistan and the Ukraine, which, as we know, things have changed over the past several years. If you want to find more information about this, you can take a look at Pew Research Center. That link will be provided to you in the notes afterwards. Maggie, I must have talked too long because, oh, there, we're not stuck. Okay, some resources that are available. So many of these crops may be due to us, but they're not new to the populations that live here, and also not new to a lot of the researchers that have been working on compiling information about some of these crops. For example, the University of Massachusetts World Crops Program has a wonderful, wonderful website with a tremendous amount of information about these crops that is broken down by continent, then by country, then by crop availability. And it also lists the types of research that they have been done and some of the results of the research trials. I will say that a couple of those links I found to be broken over time, but they get fixed. But I definitely check that out if you want to learn more. The University of Kentucky has done some work around marketing of some of these types of world crops. The link I have here is for Asian vegetables, but they also have a really nice set of resources for Hispanic vegetables. And so I would check them out too if you're looking to diversify or to scale up, if you will. One great new resource that's available is through the University of Minnesota, an emerging crop guide where they look at, I think it's 10 or 12 different crops, and it's in a really nice format of infographics that gives really solid information about growing the crops that are listed in that region. And again, I would definitely check those out. Who's also had done some work, Purdue's done some work. Cornell, Robert Haddad has done a great bunch of work that's also listed on the resource websites that you can find. So there's information available if you're searching for it. So some years ago, after I had started with OSU, I had a great interest in this because, again, a lot of the crops that I'd worked with earlier in my career are grown in that part of Northeast Ohio for a variety of different reasons. And so when I started that job, I was able to connect with a number of different types of organizations that helped refugee resettlement. One of those organizations was the Refugee Response. At that time, Maggie, who is the PI for this project, she was their farm manager. And so along with their executive director, we developed a proposal for an Ohio Specialty Crop Block Grant Promotion Program grant, which was called Leveraging Market Opportunities, Empowering Our Farmers, Expanding the Market for Locally Grown Ethnic Specialty Crops. And that took place in 2015, 2017. And our goals for this project were to identify profitable crops through market research and outreach, increase consumer awareness of locally grown ethnic specialty crops to allow for market expansion, increase availability and access to locally grown ethnic specialty crops and allow for market expansion, increase employment opportunities, continue to create niche profit markets for refugee response, and empower refugee trainees to engage in agriculture as a means to their long-term financial self-sufficiency. Again, hoping to be able to expand the markets for some new crops, provide financial benefits to those new farmers who are selling those crops, and also just to grow awareness. So what Refugee Response was able to do to start the program off was a number of informal surveys, and those surveys were to 3 different audiences. The first audience was to their current CSA and friends customers and lists. And we looked at 10 different vegetables. We looked at okra, Thai eggplant, Thai chili, peppers, long beans, bitter melon, red roselle, which is important to note because there's also a white roselle, amaranth, culantro, not cilantro, culantro, pumpkin vines, sweet potatoes. We did not choose some of the more common vegetables such as pak choi or bok choy or mizuna, because we felt that those were already somewhat known in the region. And what the consumer, and we call them the foodie crowd, told us was that they were most interested in trying sweet potato vine, Asian long beans, and pumpkin vine. And our thought behind that was simply that it's what people are used to seeing. You know, Asian long beans are not that different from regular green beans. So there's a familiarity there. They're least interested in trying bitter melon and amaranth. Amaranth, I found interesting that people were not necessarily interested in trying it because it is a very widely used green throughout the world, and it's also a green crop. But again, your research showed that they were not interested in utilizing those. And almost 3/4 of respondents stated be willing to pay more for locally produced produce. Now, chefs, or excuse me, the immigrant population themselves, again, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move this bar, it keeps reappearing over. So our chef population, many of them were already producing what we would consider an ethnic crops, particularly Asian long beans and okra. Again, also quite familiar with those. There's a lot of market familiarity. They're inspired to use a new vegetable when they would get their hands on it. And 100% of the chefs were interested in purchasing, or excuse me, using samples of products that they have not used before, which was great because it gave opportunity for, again, that consumer awareness that wasn't possibly there before. And then the last group that we were serving, Maggie, my slides will not advance.
Yeah, it's just going, it's still on the chef slide. Let's give it a second.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, just slow.
And then in the immigrant population, they were currently already purchasing from local supermarkets and ethnic markets. Most of the respondents were already familiar with the selected vegetables that we were looking at, but they were also interested in purchasing other specialty crops such as especially eggplant, ginger, and basil. So it gave us an idea of a future work that could be approached to again create more opportunities for the farmers. So I want to discuss sometimes we make mistakes when we're talking about certain crops. And when I give presentations, I often say I'm the information I'm giving out is everything I've done wrong in my life. And so I apologize up front for any confusing information, for any names I pronounced wrong, or if you've had a different experience than I have. And that's part of this presentation, is to discuss what those next opportunities are, what people's experience is out in the field. Again, to start thinking about those questions as our working group does, of what are some things that we really need to be thinking as the Urban Ag IPM working group. So when I worked in the Caribbean, I was often exposed to new types of crops. And one of those crops is a crop that goes by the name in the English-speaking Caribbean countries of sorrel. And so my entire career, I referred to the crop on the left-hand side as sorrel. I moved to Cleveland and quickly realized that sorrel was not the sorrel I knew. A sorrel here, people refer to as this red-veined green crop that can sometimes be can be a little invasive. It has an interesting taste, and it is widely grown. And then when I was visiting the refugee response farm, I saw sorrel being grown there, interestingly enough, because I'll mention why here in a moment. So what I know as sorrel is generally referred to in this region as roselle. However, depending where you are in the United States or in the world, it can be called hibiscus, it can be called Florida cranberry, it can be called cundrum, puntipalli, hoyafa, espua, and many, many other different names depending, again, where you are in the world. So again, sometimes we want to make sure that we're talking about the same plant when we're referring to some of these newer crops we don't have familiarity with. And this is why I love this plant. I mean, look at this. This is outstanding. Beautiful pinkish white flowers can, in warmer climates, become a very attractive bush. But there's some other things to know about roselle. One, it is in the hibiscus family, so you might recognize kind of that flower structure and as a familiar looking thing. It's generally grown from seed. However, it can also be grown from cuttings. So in some places, if you want a quick jump on the season, you can take cuttings. You can also grow it out in a greenhouse till it's decently sized before you plant it out. The leaf shoots are used in many Asian countries. So again, this is where not having exposure of every culture can get us in trouble sometimes. So where I worked, the leaf shoots were never used as an agricultural product. What was used were the calyx or the pods, and they were used around Christmas time because the red pods were dried or used fresh, and a Christmas drink was produced from that, a very popular traditional drink. The plant itself is daylight sensitive, so it won't begin to form pods and to flower until the days start getting shorter. So there's less day length. So in Northeast Ohio, you will never get those huge pods because you just don't have enough time. They won't start podding or flowering until after the days start getting shorter. So if we have long seasons where we don't have frost or freezing until November, you may get some. There are some day neutral selections, but again, there's a lot of variability among seed, depending where you're getting the seed from. But the leaves themselves have this wonderful citrus-like flavor that are used, again, very often in Asian countries. So my program leader when I worked for the University of the Virgin Islands, Dr. Tom Zimmerman, was probably one of the only roselle breeders in the world. The center of origin for roselle is Africa, and he was able to start getting selections through this germplasm centers. And you'll see here the variability that you can find. So as I had mentioned earlier, there's a white type sorrel. It's not as popular either for the pods or for the greens. That people, I guess, really prefer the reddish color. He was working on this one variety that kind of had the stripe look into it, and then this outstanding darker variety on the right-hand side. So you can see that there are possibilities of different colors, different shapes, different heights that are also interesting for the ornamental market as well. Yard-long beans, another that a lot of market familiarity. It's also known as asparagus beans. The cultivars will come in red and green, and they can grow up to 2 feet in length. Actually, I think I've seen them a little bit longer than that. But it's important to note, again, they are susceptible to a host of bean diseases and pests. But I don't have any data to back this up, but I don't see them as attacked as often by other beans and pests that you'd regularly see on green beans. Again, I don't have data to back that up. Malabar spinach is also one that's very easily grown and also can be a very nice and attractive landscape plant. It can be a good alternative to traditional spinach in the summer months, but it does not taste like spinach whatsoever. It will die off as soon as the temperature starts to become colder again. It grows on a vine. It should be trellised, and the leaves themselves are much thicker. But I find that they do have drought tolerance. And they'll come in two, I don't know if they're ecotypes or varieties. In some places in literature you'll see it as listed as varieties. Some you won't see any distinction. But there can be the green stem type and the purple stem type. The purple stem type is what people use as an ornamental most often because it does have an attractive purple. I will say that the purple stems and the berries that are produced will stain your hands and your clothes. So if you're growing those, just be cautious of that. But again, this is one of those crops I think does have climate resiliency. So we may see it more often in the future. Bitter melon, woof. Now, acquired taste, I would say, depending on where you're from. But bitter melon, very widely grown through Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia. You will hear and see in literature reference to two different cultivars or different varieties, and I don't know if they're different ecotypes again or what have you, but the one on the far left hand side is going to be smaller. Those are the types that you'll usually find in China. They're smaller and very I guess pickier, if you I mean they're not picky, but they do have that triangle raised bumps on them, whereas the ones on the right hand side are the ones that are more often seen in different parts of the world. They're more elongated, even though they do have that lumpy skin. That lumpier skin is smoother. On the far right side is are the Chinese type variety or cultivar, and you can see that it has ripened to a point where it has opened and the seeds are coming or showing out the bottom. If anybody has personal experience, I'd love to hear this. I have been told that that pith and those seeds become sweet and they're used in salads. But then I've had other people say that the rind never really does get sweeter. So I've heard varying amounts. What I will say is that they are susceptible to cucurbit pests and diseases. They are best trellis. In fact, that in some parts of the world, they're grown as perennial crops and as sunshades. And they can be quite attractive to birds. Maggie and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago. It's like, do you think if you surrounded a garden with bitter melon, if deer would stay out because they can have such a bitter taste? I'm like, I don't know. I think they just like tromp over it. But I do know that birds definitely will attack bitter melon. Now, amaranth, again, also another common green in different parts of the world, particularly in the Caribbean countries. The picture that I have on the left-hand side is not the type or the species that you'll see in Callaloo. But there was a commercial one on a market a couple of years ago called Tricolor or something of that nature. And this is the picture I had permission to use. There are about 60, probably more recognized species of amaranth. Many of those are problematic weed species. So Palmer amaranth, pigweed, root pigweed can be really problematic weeds. So be aware of that. So it does tolerate a wide range of conditions, can tolerate pretty poor soils, can tolerate a little bit of drought. Do be aware, however, if you do grow this and you let it go to seed and you do not cut those seeds off, you have now possibly gotten yourself into an issue with unwanted seedlings the next year. In one of my urban farmer training sites, we were growing a species that was red-leafed, which is very outstanding just in the landscape. You can also eat the leaves and process the seeds if you or the seed heads if you want. But the first year that I used the site, there was one plant that I don't know where it came from. It was just there. I'm like, I'll leave it there because it's so pretty. I like looking at it. So the next year, and I thought I had harvested it all. The next year, on the whole other side of the garden, there were about 4 areas that had now this red amaranth growing up in it, which wasn't anywhere near where I had that one plant. So I'm curious to know how it got there. But all of a sudden, from the one plant that I had, now I had about 100. I let those grow because they look really great and we're using the leaves, etc. And I'll be interested to see what I have going on next year because you never quite get all of the seeds. Loofah, this is a crop that many of us are familiar with because we might use the loofah sponges as beauty care products. And again, one of those areas that where I made mistakes because in the region that I was working, because I worked this crop extensively, we always harvested at a immature stage or a small green stage. But it can be consumed at any age, kind of like a zucchini. What'll happen over time is that the texture will become different because as it is maturing, you do get this fibrous material forming. It does prefer a warm season. And if you're going to grow it, do keep in mind that if you want to completely mature to a sponge, it's going to take probably 4 months to do so. But it is a nice crop to grow on fences and things of that nature. And there are a couple different pictures. It's, in the cucurbit family, so it has a lot of similarities. You'll have the same, you can have the same cucumber, same pests. Generally, it's going to be trellised. As I had mentioned, you can use that fully mature product as a sponge or scraping material. Sometimes you'll see them in markets or people are buying them to wash dishes and clean pots and things like that. And there is some research into using the fiber as a building material, which I find very interesting that, again, this food crop could have the potential to be something that's a natural building material. And like I said, susceptible to cucurbit and pests and diseases. There's no end to especially brassicas that we're seeing available and in the marketplace. Some of our more common ones: pak choi, the mustards, tatsoi, mizuna, kametsumana. And interestingly enough, in the area that I live in, Connecticut, one of the school districts who's really working hard to provide those culturally relevant crops to the youth who are attending the school, are purchasing the mustards, pak choys from local urban farmers to be able to provide in those school lunches because those are the foods that they are familiar with from home. And so that's a market that might be available for other farmers who are scaling up these products. As I had mentioned, there are many, many more coming on the market that we can easily obtain seeds for. And one of the challenges is that sometimes, the names that we aren't familiar with, I might ask a friend who is from that region of the world or from that culture. I'll show them a picture. I'm like, well, what is the name of this? And they're like, well, I know the name, but I don't know that there's an English name to it, but I know what it is. So some of these things are just really interesting. Give them a try. See what you like about them, what you don't like about them, and how much space they take and things of that nature. Especially peppers, again, are found all over the world. We'll find peppers that have been brought from Africa. We'll find peppers that have been brought from the Asian country. We'll find peppers that have been brought from South and Central America. People are really interested in peppers. They are susceptible to pepper pests and diseases, and you really do need to use caution if you're harvesting hot peppers. Now, there are some peppers, the agridulce types, that can look like habaneros and Scotch bonnets, but they are sweet, and the trained eye can tell the difference between them. But the seeds all look the same in general when you're planting them. But again, a lot of opportunity to try out these peppers. Again, you if they're hot peppers and you're not accustomed to hot type things, or the community that you're working at are not accustomed to the hotter type peppers, it may take a little while for you to introduce them and grow your market. but there are communities that are looking for hot peppers, hotter the better, which is, again, market opportunity. Pumpkins and squash, when we looked back at our center of origin or centers of diversity on our second slide, pumpkins in North America, pumpkins in Central America, pumpkins in South America. So again, there's a lot of diversity available, and it's also important to know that it's not just the fruit that people from different parts of the world are consuming. Sometimes they're consuming the leaves. Sometimes they're consuming the flowers. Pumpkins and squash are going to be susceptible to pumpkin pest and squash diseases here in the Midwest, but they can be used in a variety of ways. One thing to be cautious of, not only of like pumpkins and squash, but also going back to the roselle, if you're harvesting the crop for leaves, you're going to do that at the expense of flowering or fruit. So the more leaves you pull off, the less fruit you're going to get, because that's just the nature. There's nothing there to photosynthesize and produce the fruit. In general, once you say that, somebody will prove me wrong, but generally when you're removing the leaves, you're going to get less fruit production. And the last I'm going to talk about are Asian melons. These types of melons tend to have a much thinner rind. Sometimes they're known as Korean melons, and they tend to be less sweet than muskmelons or cantaloupe. And again, it's all depends on what you are used to consuming, where you grew up. If in the States, we were always looking for the sweetest cantaloupe. We were always looking for the sweetest muskmelon. If you grew up in a place where you didn't have those types of produce available, what you grow up and appreciate are the ones that are going to be what you're familiar with. So there can be a good market for some of these types of melons, again, depending on where you are working and living. So seed sources. This has been a challenge for wider scale production because you couldn't get seeds, you couldn't get them in large quantities. But some of the companies that are now carrying them are Seed Savers Exchange, Kitazwa, Tainong, True Leaf Market, Baker Creek Seed, Johnny Selected Seeds. But be aware, again, as we talk about different expectations, different ecotypes that are available, you may order something that's called Callaloo seed and grow it, and it may not be the seed type that you thought you were getting. You may have a low viability of seeds. Oftentimes people who are growing these types of crops, they're saving the seed from year to year, and that's how they're keeping the seed. And when you have those when you have that systems, you can at times get genetic variability. Again, different places, different things that come from different parts of the world, and they're going to be slightly different. Plant sources. If you're going to buy some of these plants as seedlings or transplants, you want to utilize reputable nurseries. Beware of online sources. I should say all of us, many of us, myself included, have purchased plants on eBay and Etsy and things like that. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, depending. But this is very important. Inspect any plant material very carefully when introducing new plant materials to your system. And those of you who have heard some of my presentations before, and you've heard this story, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell it again. When I worked for the University of the Virgin Islands, it was Christmas time, but we were expecting a plant shipment. We were doing some research on sweet potatoes with another university in the States. And it was Christmas Eve. I was super sick. super irritated that I had to go into work because I got a call from the security guy saying, hey, you got this package. I knew what the package was, and it couldn't stay for several days. So I go in complaining the whole time, take the package, go into the greenhouse, set the package down, go find a pair of scissors or a knife or something to open the package, open it, pull the plant material out, and it is infested in spider mites. Infested, like beyond anything I usually see. Immediately put them back in the box, took them, destroyed them. However, that less than minute time that I had that package open in the greenhouse caused me to have spider mite issues in that greenhouse for over 5 years before I could say that I had eradicated them. And I can't begin to tell you how many pesticide applications I had to make, how many times I had to go into that greenhouse, and all the time thinking, if I had only opened that someplace else out besides the greenhouse, I would have, how much time and effort I would have saved myself. So some opportunities for these world crops. We have increased market opportunities. Again, as our communities are diversifying and people are more interested, there's more places to sell, such as wholesale in grocery stores, farm to school, produce boxes. Again, there's been a lot of funding available for produce boxes, and that might be an opportunity for some growers. Direct marketing venues, such as farmers markets and value-added products. I will say when it comes to these increased market opportunities, and I'll talk about this in the final slide, is you really have to do a market analysis to see what that market is. You know, I see this here in Connecticut, which is geographically a small state. But if I go to one market on one side of Hartford and I have callaloo leaves, I won't move a single one of them. But if I have 50 bunches at different market, I'll sell those completely out every week. So you really have to know your market and where those opportunities are to sell. And I'm not sure if I mentioned value-added products. Again, things like hot peppers and juices and things of that nature. People are interested in trying something new. But also, I also feel that there are opportunities in climate smart farming, such as use of cover crops. In the Minnesota's emerging crops guide, they talk about cowpeas. Cowpeas are used as cover crops in some parts of the United States for small scale gardens. Maybe there's some opportunity there. Pigeon peas, which are also nitrogen fixing, although you can't necessarily get huge crops in northern parts of the United States yet. You know, maybe there's an opportunity to grow them, you know, terminate them and use them as a nitrogen source. Shade crops. I had mentioned earlier that in some places, plants like Malabar spinach, loofah, bitter melon are used in some parts of the world as shade crops. I mean, people will plant them on their balconies, they grow up trellises, and they create a shade. In the same way, things like clematis or hyacinth beans do for us that we're accustomed to. Some of those crops can provide lower temperatures. And also some of the crops that I talked about are drought tolerant. They can tolerate higher temperatures. So as we are facing climate uncertainty, some of these crops may be part of the answer to some of the questions that we'll have. Some of the challenges that we have in producing these crops is there are inconsistent seed supplies and sources. Also, diseases can be spread through seed, so we never want to encourage bringing seed in from another place that we don't know what we could be bringing with it. There's lack of cohesive production information. There's been a lot of interest over the past, couple decades about some of these crops, but we don't have a similar set of guides as we do for some of our more traditional crops. There's integrated pest management misunderstanding and lack of registered management products, both inorganic and organic, because they are minor crops that don't often get the attention that they you need to register for particular specific crops. We do have regional differences in a climate. We have seed diversity. So just because I say something grows this way and in Bethel, Connecticut, doesn't mean it's going to grow the same way in Cleveland or grow the same way in Minneapolis, because we do have climatic, we have soil differences. So we have to take that in consideration too. And one thing I do want to point out, and as an extension educator, it's our role and responsibility to provide people with information so that they can make the best possible choices. I have seen times when there's been use of manure that are maybe not the best practices, best management practices, not necessarily among the farmers, but sometimes among managers of community gardens and managers of larger scale plots where people are growing. And it's really important that we are helping our communities utilize those best practices for safety for all of us. If your growers are interested in scaling up, first, like I said, perform that market analysis. You should know that you have a buyer or a market if you're growing a seed or growing a type of crop that is fairly unfamiliar. Consider your helpful infrastructure. Are you going to need more trellising? Are you going to need wash stations? Are you going to need different sorts of packing and post-harvest materials? And again, create your marketing plan. I can't stress that more. We do know that there's opportunities, but we have to make sure that we are taking as much risk out of production as we possibly can, which includes having the crop sold. So I can't see the chat questions when I have the presentation up, but I'll be happy to have any conversation about the information that we just discussed.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. I don't know, this is so timely, right? Everyone has their seed catalogs right near them, right? And I was following along with you in the Seed Savers catalog that I just happened to have on my desk. So this is exciting to have this time of year. Jacqueline, one of the first questions was regarding the Asian long beans. The question was, I imagine there are more than one variety of the long bean. Do you have any examples of the exact names? They mentioned that they saw Python as one. And is there anything you can think to expand on the Asian long bean varieties? Can you?
So I think two that I can call off are one's red noodle and one Gita, Gita, are two that I have grown in the past. I think they're still available on the market. You need to have a good trellising system. Like most beans, they need to be harvested on a very regular basis, so over 2 or 3 days. If you're using them as the if you're using them for market.
I just took a quick look at Johnny's Select Seed. It looks like they replaced Gita with Python. So that might be the new green Asian long bean. Okay. The other question is, they say, thanks so much for the presentation. As you know, some of the ethnic crops are considered invasive plants. I understand their aggressive nature, but they are popular vegetables in some cultures. Are you aware of any regulatory aspects to this issue?
Yes. So again, that's why we never encourage people to stick seeds in their sacks or packets when they're coming in, because we never want to be in a situation where we're introducing. There have been a couple crops over the course of my career that people have wanted, but there are regulatory restrictions, such as, and Maggie, I made you help here, water spinach was one of them.
Yeah, well,
There's like there's another one that is a very low growing kind of uh very succulent plant, not purslane. And I can't think of what the we called it cress, but it's not like what I would call cress in Northeast Ohio.
mhm,
I know that both of those crops, APHIS and CBP, were very, very strong in saying no, no, you are do not, people cannot bring this in, because they have been known to be aggressive. As far as, like I had mentioned, the amaranth being like very seed heavy producer, we have not seen that become aggressive in the same way we've seen other sorts of that genus become aggressive. But they can become, challenging weed issues if you don't manage them.
absolutely. And kind of an extension of this topic is Bernard asked how to get a permit to import seeds. I don't know if you're able to. What's your advice in that
So
regard?
USDA is the entity that provides permits, and they can give you guidance on whether those are allowed crops or not allowed crops. But it is really important that if you are trying to do that, that you go through them. They are the regulatory agency that does that, and they're very strict, as they should be. We have to protect our food system. I have gone through the permitting process, and it's I wouldn't say it's an easy process, but you're doing your due diligence.
Mhm. And just a random comment off of that too, we had right after the pandemic, there was this strange incident in Northeast Ohio where there was a bunch of seeds that no one ordered were just started to being delivered to random people's addresses. And there was just this big wave, and they happened to come from China. And it was just kind of this big scare. People weren't sure what the material was, and it was reported to the extension offices, and we kind of had to help people return those seeds and for investigation. So, things like that can happen, and then you're happy the regulatory bodies are there to help out. So,
I also want to mention that as extension, we do not recommend that you take plant parts that you buy in a grocery store and plant those. Like there are some propagated material that can be purchased from the grocery store, can be planted, it will grow. However, it's just not, for us, it's not a recommended practice.
someone asked if you seen any interest in Mexican sour gherkins.
Yes, yes and no. I know in Columbus, oh boy, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, they're going for like $20 a pound. Um, again, in those specialty markets, you can get some great traction for Mexican gherkins. Little time consuming to harvest, which is why they go for $20 a pound, probably $25 a pound now. But you do see it again. If you're in the right market.
And someone offered was the ground cover one called water leaf or EFO. I don't know how to pronounce that. Gubre is called water leaf. This is maybe the one you were referring to.
It could be. I can't open the picture, Claire, but it could very well be.
Cucamelons. Cucamelons are very prolific and will seed over in Southwest Ohio.
You mean they'll drop seeds and then grow the next year? Or they're
And
gonna
also,
take over?
I should also welcome people to unmute themselves. I have changed the settings back, so if you do have a question that needs a little bit more than the chat box will allow, feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, so that's what Deb was referring to, was over. Oh, Claire got another picture up there.
No,
That doesn't.
no, that's not what I was referring to. But that could very well be a very invasive plant too. That one I'm not familiar with. Or the way that I'm seeing it.
But there's a lot available from the seed companies. So take a look. You may not have to even go that far to think about, you know, getting new things on the market. You might just be able to get something from the seed providers that are already in existence.
And they have done the regulatory work for you, because they're not going to go in conflict with regulatory laws.
And you do have to shop around too, because some of those companies do provide more of the like wholesale quantities and prices, and some of them are more for the home, the backyard gardener who just wants the packet of the seeds. So.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. And if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me at the email that I provided. Again, everybody stay warm and safe these next couple days.
Dreaming of
even here in
warmer
Connecticut,
temperatures.
we're seeing some challenges. So.
Absolutely. And as Jacqueline mentioned, she had several links in her presentation. So when I sent out the recording on Friday, I'll make sure to list out those links below the recording link, and include anything else that Jacqueline provides in addition to that. So. All right, and I hope you can join us next week too. Next week, we're going to be here at the same time, and we're going to be talking about cover crops. So another great topic in the world of urban agriculture and integrated pest management. So thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you next week as well.